everyone. I have decided that I'm going to make quick videos after our classes that will go over what we covered in class. So if you missed class and you need to catch up, or you were in class and you need a refresher, or you didn't understand something, I'm going to go over it again here. So you can always go to YouTube and find those videos. So in class, we go over things more slowly. You can ask questions. I wait for you to do it along with me. In this, I'm just going to zip through so that you can, since you have the ability to pause and everything. So that's what we're going to do here. So for class 1, we covered the running stitch, the back stitch, and then we covered how to make them a whipped version and a woven version. So I'm going to do that here. So for those of you that missed class, you've got your fabric in your hoop. If you are providing your own materials, we are using a 6-inch hoop in class. You can sort of have an idea of scale. And what we are making, it will take us about 3 classes to make this, is I'm calling it the Quirky Bird excuse me, the Quirky Bird Stitch Sampler. And so we've got this quirky little bird. Colors don't matter. We're just learning some different stitches here. So the stitches that we're going to learn tonight are the woven, the woven back stitch. And then over here, we've got the whipped running stitch, which this means nothing to you as I'm pointing to these. So let's just jump in. Okay, so you've got your hoop. You want to take your disappearing ink pen or a pencil, whatever you've got, and we're going to sketch out onto your fabric the quirky bird so that you know where you're putting things. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I've traced a circle that's the size of the hoop. I'm going to do that here. So here's my hoop. My quirky bird is just sort of the shape of like a smiley face emoji, like a big smiley face. Yeah, like this. That was creepy. So you're going to come about halfway down your circle. And he's got tail feathers, so you want to leave some space over here for tail feathers. I'm actually going to draw my tail feathers first. Doesn't matter how many, 3, 4, okay. And then I'm going to draw my big smiley face shape, leaving room for a beak over here. Okay, and then I'm going to draw a wing. Okay, that's all you need to worry about tonight. If you're using disappearing ink, this is going to be gone in an hour anyway. So what we're going to do tonight, I only had you draw the beak and the tail feathers to make sure you had room. We are going to do a stitch here and a stitch here. Okay, so let's start with a running stitch, which will be the back of your bird, okay? And I am going to, for these videos, I'm gonna work on this little guy so we aren't distracted by the whole bird going on. But the shape of this smiley face is what we're gonna do here. So I'll just draw one with my disappearing ink pen so you can see. A little bit. All right, now I'm gonna switch to making this big in the video so it'll be easier for you to see. All right, there we go. So I've got my needle and thread. This is cut length of thread, the length of my fingertips to about my elbow. I'm going to tie a knot in the end. I'm using the embroidery floss for this, which is 6 threads together. It's a big, thick thread. It's nice and easy for you to see on the video. If you're using this, you can tie 1 knot. If you're using that number 8 pearl cotton, which is the really thin stuff, you might want to tie a knot on top of your knot because that thread is thin and sometimes it can pull through your fabric depending what you're using. Here's a little trick for tying a good knot. Put your needle in here, and then when you pull, your second knot gets tied right on top of your first one. Sometimes when I don't put my needle in there, I get a knot here and a knot down here. Okay, so my tail is about, which is the end that's not knotted, is about half the length of my thread. Okay, so I'm going to start over here and we are going to do the running stitch. If you've ever done any sewing, you've done the running stitch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up on the corner here and you can see my needle. I sort of drag it across my thread or the back of my fabric, and that helps me find my starting point. I'm going to come right up with that. Okay. Pull that gently. Now I'm going to turn this over and I'm going to make sure that my knot is flat flush against the back of my fabric. Sometimes you think it's pulled and it's hanging out back here. That's no good. So make sure it's touching the back of your fabric. Okay. Then I'm going to pick my stitch length and I'm going to try to be consistent. So I'm going to come down here. You can see my thumbnail here. I'm going to choose a stitch length about that big. Okay. It doesn't matter how big it is. It's up to you. The only thing you want to be careful about, because we are going to do something with this later, is you want to make sure that your eye of your needle will fit under your stitch. So I'll show you that in a second here. I'm going to pull this through to the back. Okay, and what I meant by that is you want to make sure that your needle will pass underneath that stitch easily. So if you're using the big eye needles, you might need to do a little bit bigger stitch. Okay, so there's my first stitch in the running stitch. I came up from the bottom, over one. I'm giving this a little tug, make sure it's nice. I can see my my line through my fabric, so that's handy. So I can come right up like this. I want the space I leave in between my first stitch and my second stitch to be about the length of my stitches that I'm doing. All right, I'm just going to pull that through to the back. I'm going to come up here, about the same stitch length, just following my line. Every once in a while, I turn this over to make sure that my threads aren't hanging loose back here. I want to keep them nice and taut. And that is the running stitch. It's just sewing. You didn't know it was so fancy, right? Okay, I'm going to finish this line and get right back to you. All right, so I'm at the last stitch of my running stitch. I'm going to go down on the bottom here. I'm going to flip it over. Now, if I want to do my next row in green, I could just jump over here and do it. I wouldn't recommend that. I don't really care what the back of my embroidery looks like. I'm not interested in keeping it perfect like I'm in a Jane Austen novel. That's not what I'm doing. But the neater you keep the back of your fabric, the easier your life is going to be. So always knot off when you finish a line. And then if you're going to move somewhere else, start again. I just did something without explaining it, so pretend I didn't do that. So I've just finished my last stitch. To knot it off, I'm going to take my needle, and it's easier if you go under with the eye first. I'm going to run that needle under the closest stitch. Okay. I didn't go through the fabric. I just went through the closest stitch. Now I left a little loop here, and I'm going to have my needle go under that. And I'm going to pull this against that stitch to make a knot. Okay. This one's a little far. I'm going to do it twice, just to make sure it's nice and tight. Okay. That is now knotted. I'm going to take my scissors. I'm not going to cut it off right there, just in case it has a little bit of give to it, but I'm going to trim it off there. And while I'm at it, I'm going to make this knot over here a little bit shorter. Okay, that's that. Now I'm going to do the back stitch in a different place. I'm going to tie my knot if I have enough thread left, which I do. Okay, and my tail here had gotten kind of short. I was tugging on it as I went, so I'm just sort of making that this is not going to pull through my needle. It was about like this. That's dangerous because when you pull on your needle, this can pull out. So I'm just going to go like this. Okay, that'll be plenty. Flip this over. Now, this was the back of our bird. So now I'm going to do the wing. Like that. And I'm going to do the wing in a back stitch. Now, same thing for my back stitch. I am going to come up right where it starts. Takes a little practice to find, to be able to poke your needle up accurately from the back. It gets easier though. Okay, checking the back, that's nice and flush against my fabric. Turn it over. Back stitch starts just like the running stitch. I'm going to go forward one stitch length. Again, make sure you're giving yourself a big enough stitch that a needle can pass under it for the next step. All right, this is where the back stitch gets a little bit different. I flip this over, I've done one stitch. Now I'm going to come up one stitch length forward. Okay, same space size as the length of my stitch. I'm going to come up here. Now this is the back stitch, so I'm going to go backwards, and I'm going to go right in the hole that I came through before, or as close to it as I can get. So this makes a more solid line. Okay, flipping this over, looks good so far. Okay, I'm going to come up again. Backwards into the same spot. Looks good. Coming backwards every time, right next to it or it down into the same hole. Okay, finding my spot, same stitch length. Just following the line I drew. All right, that's that. I'll be back in a minute. Here I am, ready for my last stitch of this line. I'm gonna find my spot at the back, come up. You can see my tail's getting pretty short here, so I'm having to be careful. Go back in. Okay. Flip this over. This is what your the back of your back stitch will look like. Same thing, I'm going to find my closest stitch and tie a knot. So I'm going to slip this under. Here's my little loop. I'll go right through there. That one was close. That's nice and tight. You can do it twice if you want. I'm going to do it once. While I'm at it, I'm going to trim my knot. That's that. So here's your running stitch. Here is your back stitch. All right. Next thing we're going to do is we are going to whip our running stitch. Okay, I've got a different color thread here. I'm going to tie my knot. Whipping can also be, well, I liken whipping a stitch to wrapping a stitch. And you're just going to sort of twirl around it, and it makes this nice sort of like candy cane barber pole effect. Okay, so here this red and green is what that is. So here we are, we're going to whip our running stitch. Got my tail nice and tight, or nice and the right length, so it's not going to pull through my needle. Got my knot coming through the back, right behind where my running stitch started. Okay, I don't want to come through the same hole. You don't want to come up a hole that your thread originally went down, because it can get stuck and make a big mess. But I'm going to come up pretty close. Okay. Checking the back to make sure that that knot is flush. It is. All right, this is where I'm going to pass my needle underneath the threads. Now I'm turning my needle sideways again so that the eye of the needle is going through first. That's going to keep me from getting caught in my fabric. They make needles that are blunt. They're called Tapestry needles. If you decide this is your favorite stitch in the world and you want to do it all the time, you could get some Tapestry needles. I'm going to pass this through. So I'm right-handed. It's easier for me to work from right to left. If you're left-handed, you can absolutely do this the other way, left to right. It doesn't matter. We're just going to be consistent. I am always going to pass under my stitch from right to left. Okay. I'm going to pull that taut. And here I go again, right to left. Right to left. And that is it. We now have a whipped running stitch. Easy peasy. Right to left. Right to left. Okay. Okay, got a little stray thread here. That's that. Now, again, I'm just going to end this by going in the end, just past the end of where my last stitch ended, right there. Okay. Flip it over, pass this under. Tie it up. That's that. Okay. So again, with the whip stitch, you're always going from the same side. I went right to left, right to left, right to left underneath my running stitch. Okay, now we're going to do a woven back stitch. So we've got our back stitch and we're going to weave it. Okay, I've got a different color thread. I've got, actually, let's use pink because it's lighter. It'll be easier to see against the green. So here's my pink. Tie my knot. Now with weaving, if you've ever done any weaving, you know that you go back and forth. You sort of alternate. Okay, I'll try this without my needle. Got it. One knot on top of the other. Okay, so with weaving, we're going to do the exact same thing we did with the whip stitch, but we're going to go right to left, left to right, right to left, left to right. I'm going to come up here, right behind it. If you don't have a gap in between your wing and the back of your bird, you can just come off to the side a little bit, or which I guess would look like that. It doesn't really matter. Okay, I'm going to come up behind that. Check my knot. Looks good. You know what? This is a little long. I feel like that has the potential to get in my way, so I'm going to trim that. Okay, here we go. So with the woven stitch, we are going to alternate sides that we go under. I'm going eye of my needle first, under here. Now, there's a lot of different effects you can do with the woven stitch. One of the things you can do, let me show you in my original stitch sampler here. This red line is a woven, I wove under what was already whipped. So I wove under a whipped stitch. So you can play with this in a lot of ways. But I wove this through alternating back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. I did not pull it taut. So if you want to have that fun like loopy effect, you're just going to leave your loop. It's a little bit tricky because you have to control your tension of your loop. So you kind of, it's a little finicky. Okay, so you would just do that and leave it loose like this. I'm not going to do that for this because it takes too long for our little video. But I am now going to alternate. I started right, left, right, pulling that taut. So this pink is actually kind of hard to see. I apologize for that. But you're just going to keep going. Okay. Now, when I get to the end, same thing. I'm going to put my needle under, tie the knot. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through here. Now, if you want to, you can do a double woven stitch. I'm going to come through going the other way. So now I'm getting that weaving effect on both sides of the stitch. If I wanted to make this a third color, I absolutely could have done that. I could have tied off my pink and started with that blue coming in the alternate way. So you can kind of see, let's see if I change my light here, if y'all can see that a little bit better. No, that might help. Okay, so you can see here that I've got this sort of makes this nice little loop of pinks with the green running through the center. Okay, now I'm going to go back in here at the end, near where I started. Flip that over, find my closest stitch. Leave my loop, run it through, tie a knot. Looks good. I'm going to trim that off. Now, bonus stitch. We're going to do a French knot. So the French knot is how I did the eyeball on my little bird. And it's also how I did these little blue dots inside the loops of my woven stitch that I just did. Okay. So French knot is a little tricky. So we're going to go over it a couple times. Okay, I'm going to use the blue for this one. I'm going to tie my knot. All right, I'm going to work with a little bit of a shorter thread. So I'm going to pull this tail down a little bit. All right, here's my French knot. I'm going to do it in a random place over here. Here we go. Pulling this through. You know what? That's actually too long of a tail. I need to have a little bit more thread to work with, and I don't want to end up with a double thread in my knot. So that's pulled tight. Okay, now again, like I said, this is tricky, so stay with me here. I'm holding my needle above my fabric. I'm holding it about, so now my needle's sitting on top of my finger here. So I'm holding it about this far above my fabric. I'm gonna, and it's perpendicular to me. So I'm gonna wrap this away from myself around my needle 2 or 3 times. You can do this as many times as you want. So again, needle is perpendicular to my body. Here we go. I'm wrapping this around once, twice, 3 times. Now I'm pulling on this. You can see how long this thread is here. It's pretty short. I'm going to stick the point of my needle back in really close to where I came out, but not down the same hole, just right next to it. Okay. While I'm doing it, this is a 2-hander. I'm still pulling on this thread. My 3 wraps have pulled tight around my needle, and my needle is through the back. You can see that wiggle wiggle. Okay, I'm still holding my needle. I'm pulling these knots taut, and while I'm pulling this thread, I push my needle all the way through. You got to give it a little tug here to get your eye of your needle through your 3 wraps. Got it through. Now I'm gently pulling on this thread from the back, and I just turned this little knot, and you can see it sticks up from the fabric. It's a little bit 3-dimensional here as opposed to sitting flat on the fabric. So that's how you do that. This is great for making flowers. All right, let's do that again. I'm going to jump over here. Pulling my tail's too long, it's stuck. Okay. My thread is through my fabric. Okay, I'm holding it with my left hand a little bit away from the fabric. I'm holding my needle above the fabric, perpendicular to my body. I'm wrapping the thread around the shaft of the needle 3 times, sticking the point of the needle into the fabric quite close to where I came out. I'm tugging on my thread with my left hand while I am pushing my needle through the fabric. I'm still making sure that this is nice and taut. If you let go of this, it's going to undo. Okay, I'm reaching around the back now with my right hand, giving this a good tug. By the time you get the eye of your needle against your fabric, you can let go of this. This is pulled nice and tight. Okay, I'm going to put my thumb there to pull. Might have to get pliers to get this through. There we go. Got it through. Okay. And there's another little French knot. So these are so fun for polka dots, great bird eye, really good for flowers. So that's your French knot. Okay. And with your French knot, if I hadn't jumped over here, there's not really a good way to tie a knot. So what you can do is you can use your needle and just tie it over itself and put your needle down on the fabric like this to tie your knot. Or that didn't quite get it. Here's a trick I like to do sometimes. I'll cut my thread with some length, and because I'm using the 6 strands of embroidery floss, this is a cheat. This is a total cheat. I just pulled it apart into 3 and 3, and I'm just tying it like I tie my shoe. It's a cheat, but it works. All right, so there's that. So the green, again, we've got our running stitch. We ran this through the same direction every time to make it a whipped running stitch. This is our back stitch, and we wove through alternating under each stitch one by one, left to right, left to right, left to right. Then we flipped around and came back the other way to make this a woven running stitch. And that, my friends, was class 1. Yeah, I like how this looks like a goofy smiley face a little bit. This is my face right now. Thanks for being here. I'll see you next time. Bye.